The lonely billionaire spent Christmas alone, until a waitress said, "Come have dinner at my place." What if the richest man in the city had never truly felt the warmth of a real Christmas dinner? Richard Blackwell sat in his penthouse office on Christmas Eve, surrounded by floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a perfect view of the twinkling city below. At 42, he owned 3 companies, 2 private jets, and more money than most people could spend in 10 lifetimes. Yet, as he watched families hurrying through the snow-covered streets carrying wrapped presents and steaming cups of cocoa, he felt something he rarely allowed himself to acknowledge: loneliness. The silence in his office was deafening. His secretary had gone home hours ago. His business partners were with their families. Even his housekeeper had the day off. Richard picked up a crystal paperweight from his mahogany desk, turning it over in his hands as he remembered Christmases from his childhood, before success had consumed everything else. Tonight, like every Christmas for the past 15 years, he'd eat alone. "Where are you watching from tonight?" Richard made his way through the empty lobby of his building, his expensive leather shoes echoing against the marble floor. Outside, the December wind cut through his wool coat as he walked aimlessly through the quiet streets. Most restaurants were closed, their windows dark and uninviting. He'd forgotten how different the world felt on Christmas Eve. Warmer somehow, despite the bitter cold. After 20 minutes of walking, he spotted a small diner tucked between a hardware store and a laundromat. The neon sign flickered "Mel's Place," and through the steamy windows he could see a few customers enjoying their meals. A bell chimed as he pushed through the door, grateful for the rush of warm air that greeted him. "Welcome to Mel's," called a voice from behind the counter. Richard looked up to see a woman in her mid-30s with kind brown eyes and graying blonde hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. Her name tag read Helen. She wore a red sweater under her apron, clearly in the Christmas spirit despite working on the holiday. "Just one?" Helen asked, grabbing a menu and leading him to a booth near the window. Richard nodded, suddenly feeling out of place in his $1,000 suit among the diner's humble vinyl seats and checkered floor. "Coffee?" Helen offered, already reaching for the pot. Something about her genuine smile made Richard feel less invisible than he had in months. As Helen poured his coffee, she noticed him glancing around at the nearly empty diner. "Not many places to go on Christmas Eve," she said with a knowing look. "Most folks are home with family." Richard stirred his coffee slowly, the warmth seeping through the ceramic mug and into his cold hands. "What about you? Shouldn't you be home too?" Helen's smile faltered for just a moment before returning. "Someone's got to keep the coffee warm for travelers like yourself," she said. "Besides, this place is like family to me." But Richard caught something in her voice, a loneliness that mirrored his own. As the evening wore on, the last customers filtered out, leaving just Richard and Helen in the diner. She refilled his cup without being asked, and he found himself ordering pie just to have a reason to stay longer. "You know," Helen said, settling into the booth across from Richard as the clock struck 9, "in all my years working here, you're the first person I've met who looks more tired than I feel." Richard looked up from his barely touched apple pie, surprised by her directness. "Long day," he said simply. "Every day's a long day when you're running from something," Helen replied, her voice gentle but perceptive. "What are you running from?" The question hung in the air between them. Richard found himself studying Helen's face, the laugh lines around her eyes, the small scar on her chin, the way she waited patiently for his answer without pushing. When was the last time someone had really looked at him? Not his bank account or his business empire, but him. "I used to love Christmas," Richard said finally. "When I was 8, my grandmother would make this incredible dinner. The whole house smelled like cinnamon and roast turkey. She'd tell stories about when she was young, and we'd all sit around the tree until midnight." His voice grew quieter. "She died when I was 12. After that, Christmas became just another day." Helen nodded, understanding flooding her features. "My grandmother raised me too," she said. "Lost her 5 years ago. Sometimes I catch myself setting an extra place at dinner, forgetting she's not coming home." She paused, then looked directly into Richard's eyes. "But you know what she always told me? Love doesn't die with people, Helen. It just finds new ways to show up." Richard felt something shift inside his chest, a warmth he hadn't experienced in years. "What about your family? Your children?" For the first time, Helen's composure cracked slightly. "Never had children. My husband and I tried for years, but—" She shrugged, forcing a smile. "Life doesn't always give you what you plan for." "I'm sorry," Richard said, meaning it. "Don't be. I've got my regulars here, my neighbors. Sometimes family is what you make, not what you're born with." As if on cue, the diner's phone rang. Helen answered, and Richard watched her face change as she listened. "Oh no, Mrs. Chen. Of course, don't worry about it. Is he going to be okay?" When Helen hung up, she looked troubled. "My neighbor's husband fell on the ice. She can't make it to dinner tomorrow like we planned. Looks like it'll just be me and the turkey again. If this moment touched your heart, please give the video a thumbs up." Richard felt something stirring, a decision forming that surprised even him. "Helen," Richard said carefully, "would you mind if I asked you something personal?" She looked up from wiping down the counter, curiosity and caution mixed in her expression. "Shoot. When you go home tonight, to your empty apartment, and you know tomorrow will be quiet except for the TV, how do you keep going? How do you not let the loneliness eat you alive?" The question came out rougher than Richard intended, revealing more vulnerability than he'd shown anyone in decades. Helen stopped what she was doing and really looked at him, past the expensive clothes and confident exterior to the man beneath. "You want to know the truth?" Helen asked, sitting back down across from him. "Some days I don't handle it well. Some days I cry in the shower or talk to my cat like she's actually going to answer back." She smiled sadly. "But then I remember what my grandmother used to say about Christmas dinner. She'd say, the magic isn't in the perfect meal or the fancy decorations, it's in the sharing. Even if you're sharing with just one person, even if that person is a stranger, you're keeping the spirit alive." Richard felt his chest tighten. "I haven't shared Christmas dinner with anyone in 15 years. "Why?" Helen asked gently. "Because—" Richard struggled to find words that had been buried for so long. "Because I convinced myself I didn't need anyone. I built this empire, this perfect life on paper, but somewhere along the way, I forgot how to just be with people, real people, not business associates or employees who tell me what they think I want to hear." Helen reached across the table and placed her hand over his. Her fingers were warm and slightly rough from years of hard work. "You know what I think? I think your grandmother would be sad to see you eating alone tomorrow." The simple statement hit Richard like a physical blow. He thought of his grandmother's voice, her hands teaching him to make cinnamon rolls, her laugh echoing through their old house. For the first time in years, his eyes filled with tears. "I don't even know how to be around people anymore," he whispered. "Well," Helen said, squeezing his hand gently, "lucky for you, I'm an excellent teacher." She took a deep breath, then smiled with a courage that amazed him. "Richard, would you like to come to my place tomorrow for Christmas dinner? It won't be fancy, but it'll be real. Have you ever faced a moment that changed everything? Let us know in the comments." Richard stared at her, his heart pounding with something between terror and hope. Richard arrived at Helen's apartment the next evening, carrying 2 grocery bags and feeling more nervous than he had before any business merger. The building was old but well-maintained, with Christmas lights strung along the hallways. When Helen opened her door, wearing a simple green dress and the biggest smile he'd seen all year, Richard felt something inside him relax for the first time in decades. "You didn't have to bring anything," Helen said, taking the bags from him. Her apartment was small but warm, filled with the scent of roasting turkey and the glow of candles. Photos covered every surface. Friends, neighbors, the grandmother she'd mentioned. Moments of real joy captured in simple frames. "I brought wine," Richard said, then paused. "And this." He pulled out a small wrapped box. "It belonged to my grandmother. I thought maybe you should have it." Helen unwrapped the box with careful fingers, gasping when she saw the delicate silver locket inside. "Richard, this is beautiful. I can't accept this. Please," he said quietly. "It's been sitting in a safe for 30 years. My grandmother would have wanted it to be worn by someone who understood what Christmas really means." As Helen fastened the locket around her neck, Richard noticed she was crying. "Thank you," she whispered. "This is the most thoughtful gift anyone's given me in years." Dinner was everything Richard had forgotten Christmas could be. They talked for hours, about Helen's dreams of opening her own restaurant, Richard's memories of building his first business, the small joys they'd both overlooked in their pursuit of getting through each day. The turkey was slightly dry, the mashed potatoes had lumps, and it was the most perfect meal of Richard's life. "You know," Helen said as they cleared the dishes, "I have a confession. Yesterday, when I invited you over, I was terrified you'd say no." "Why?" Richard asked, genuinely curious. "Because I saw something in you that I recognized. That bone-deep loneliness that makes you feel like you're disappearing a little more each day. I thought maybe we could save each other from that, at least for one night." Richard set down the plate he was holding and turned to face her. "Helen, you didn't save me for one night. You saved me, period. If you've been enjoying this story, subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming tales." As they stood in her tiny kitchen, Richard realized that for the first time in 15 years, he wasn't thinking about tomorrow's meetings or next quarter's projections. He was simply, completely present. 6 months later, Richard stood in the same diner where he'd met Helen, but everything had changed. The "for sale" sign that had been hanging in the window for months was gone, replaced by a bright new sign reading, "Helen's Kitchen." Good food, good friends. "You really didn't have to buy the whole building," Helen said, wiping her hands on her apron as she surveyed the renovated space. The checkered floors had been polished to a shine, new booths installed, and the kitchen expanded to accommodate Helen's growing menu of comfort foods. "I wanted to," Richard said, adjusting his tie. It was still expensive, but today he wore it with a different kind of confidence. "Besides, every good investment needs strong management, and you're the best manager I know." Helen laughed, the sound filling the diner with warmth. Who would have thought? A billionaire and a waitress running a diner together. "You're not a waitress anymore," Richard reminded her. "You're the owner, chef, and heart of this place." Through the window, they watched regular customers beginning to arrive for the dinner rush. Mrs. Chen waved from her usual booth. Her husband's leg finally healed from his fall. A young couple shared pie in the corner booth where Richard had sat that first night. 3 construction workers debated football over coffee and burgers. "Do you ever regret it?" Helen asked, watching Richard survey the scene. "Stepping back from the corporate world to focus on this?" Richard considered the question. He still ran his companies, but he'd learned to delegate, to trust others, to leave the office at a reasonable hour. More importantly, he'd learned that success measured in relationships was far richer than success measured in profit margins. "The only thing I regret," Richard said, "is waiting 42 years to find out what I'd been missing." Helen smiled and picked up 2 menus. "Speaking of which, Mrs. Patterson just called. She's bringing her granddaughter by tonight. Apparently, the girl's been having a hard time since her parents' divorce. And Mrs. Patterson thought maybe we could work some of that Christmas magic." "Of course," Richard said, rolling up his sleeves. "What's our specialty again?" "Making sure nobody eats alone unless they want to," Helen replied, just like she did every day. As the dinner rush began, Richard watched Helen move through the diner with practiced grace, checking on customers, refilling coffee cups, and making everyone feel like they belonged. He thought of his grandmother, and for the first time since her death, he was certain she was watching over him with pride. That Christmas Eve had taught him the most valuable lesson of his life. Sometimes the greatest gift you can receive is the chance to give someone else exactly what they need. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, it turns out to be exactly what you needed to. If you enjoyed this story, please remember to like, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe for more heartwarming tales. Thank you for joining us for this journey of connection, hope, and the magic that happens when 2 lonely hearts choose to be brave enough to reach out to each other.